Welcome to Season 2 of the ZK Whiteboard Sessions. I'm Nico, I'll be today's host, and with me I have David from ZK Security.
Hey guys.
If you have not yet, I encourage you to check out Season 1, because we are going to be building upon what was learned in those modules. There's also a study club in the ZK Hack Discord, where we go over the sessions week after week. Actually, it's by doing those sessions that we realized a few things were missing, or a few things needed updates. So we're back with a new set of modules, sponsored by a grant from the Ethereum Foundation ZK Grants program. And today's module is going to be about what is ZK. And I mean what is zero knowledge, the actual cryptographic property. And this is something that's really important because in all the episodes we didn't really cover this. So David, today we're going to go over the theory, some of the practice as well, and see if our good friend Plonk is zero knowledge.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so everybody always talks about ZKP, zero knowledge proofs, and these kind of things. And the ZK is always kind of like mysterious, and it's almost like we don't really care about it. So I guess we're going to dig more into what exactly it is. The first thing we can talk about is sort of a high level, what is the API of ZK?
Sure.
So if you think of a prover and a verifier, like all of these things, and you really abstract it, you can, what they're really doing is that they're proving a program or a statement or whatever.
Yeah.
In our days and age, we think about programs because we're like general purpose ZKP. And so here we have like some, let's say some function, right?
Cool.
And this function takes like some arguments, maybe I'll write that bigger, arg2, arg1, maybe produce some outputs. And this is like purely computational, right? Like you're running that on your computer and maybe you want to prove to me that running this function with these arguments gives this output, right? And so usually when we talk about ZK, ZK comes in place when you want to like mask something. Like you want to prove to me that you're computing this thing, but you don't really want to show me this argument.
Okay.
So a typical example is like, this is a Sudoku solver. This is like a grid of a Sudoku that's missing some squares. And this is the actual solution. And this is like true. This is a good solution. And you're masking that.
Makes sense.
Hopefully that makes sense. This is really, I always tell people if you want to like think about ZK, don't think about ZK, think about pure computation, and then think about what you want to like mask. And you don't need to understand how ZK works. You can just think of it from a high level. It seems like a lot of people sometimes care more about the succinctness of modern schemes. So we don't really talk about ZK so much in modern schemes. People tend to talk about ZK SNARKs or
Right.
SNARKs. Maybe I'll write it down. And the succinctness comes from that S. I don't know how to write succinctness. I always mess it up, but I will try. And people can correct me at home if they want. And basically this says, okay, you're going to prove to me this computation, but it's gonna, when I'm gonna verify your proof, which is kind of like a signature over that computation, it's gonna take me less time to verify it than it would have taken me to like, if you send me the arguments to run the function myself.
I see.
Right, so there's kind of a, like ZKPs have really two interesting things. You can mask some of you can prove to me a computation, you can mask some of the inputs or outputs, right? Like, again, here you can mask that, or you can mask that, or you can mask whatever you want.
Sure.
Although it's not very useful if you mask everything. But also you can, there's a succinctness aspect where it's very cheap for me to verify a proof.
So succinctness and zero knowledge are two separate properties, and you can have one without the other, or you can have both.
Exactly. Some schemes are not succinct, some schemes are not ZK. And as we'll see, actually, most schemes are not ZK, and ZK is sort of like, you can add it at the end if you want, either for free or like you have to think about it. And maybe we should mention that a lot of schemes don't even use the ZK, like modern ZK rollups or so-called ZK rollups
Are not ZK?
Are not really ZK because they don't actually mask anything. They mostly care about compressing all of that computation in a way that's easy to verify. It's like, yeah.
So should we define ZK? Like, what do we mean? What is it?
Okay, so
this property?
At a high level, this is that, right? But like, if we look at deeper, there's a deeper meaning behind it, and as cryptographers, we have to think about the deeper meaning. So the way we can think about it is that, imagine I'm the prover and you're the verifier. I want to prove something to you, but there's some, I really want to hide that stuff from you, right? We can think of these schemes where usually that's what we do, right? We're communicating. I'm sending you a message, you're sending me a message, I'm sending you a message. We go back and forth. Actually, a lot of very basic schemes are just 3 messages, which are called sigma protocol because of the shape of the sigma. And here I really want to prove something to you, but I don't want to, like I said, leak this thing.
Yeah.
And so the idea is that, or a way that we try to theorize that, which is kind of hard to understand actually, is that if I was talking to, maybe I can, so I'm the prover, right?
Sure.
And I don't know if we're going to talk about soundness at some point, but this is,
Sure. I think
maybe I should mention it also. But there's kind of competing properties of proof systems. As the verifier, you want to make sure I'm not lying to you, but as the prover, I want to make sure I'm not, you're not getting information from me, right?
Makes sense.
And so as the prover, or as the verifier, you want to see if you can distinguish between this wall where you're talking to me and you're trying to obtain information from me, or you're talking to a what we call a simulator. So this is how we get into the theory of it.
Okay.
And if you can talk to a simulator that has no idea about the Sudoku solution or whatever, and they give you the same result as if you were talking to me, a real prover, then you can't really tell if you're talking to me or to a simulator that doesn't even know about the actual, we should call it witness at this point.
Yeah.
Then the scheme is zero knowledge. So that's my introduction to it. Maybe it doesn't make sense, but I wanted to introduce the idea of simulator.
So the intuition behind this is, even though the simulator doesn't know the witness, we can have this interaction?
Right. And I'll write witness here because we just used the word. So witness is the stuff that we're trying to mask. And yeah, so maybe I'll write the API of a simulator.
Yeah.
But imagine that this argument is actually not ZK, it's public.
Okay.
We say that usually this is the statements. So statement usually is what's known and public, and the witness is what you're trying to mask. And so the simulator, let's say S, usually just take the statements. Usually X is the statement, W is the witness, doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Usually just take the statements, whereas a prover, on the other hand, usually takes a statement and a witness. So,
right.
Sudoku grid and Sudoku solution. And so you're thinking if I can sort of, as a verifier, just talk to a simulator that doesn't know anything about the witness and it looks the same as with a prover, then when I interact with a prover, I don't really learn anything either.
That makes sense. Should we maybe see a concrete example of a simulator?
A good example to see these kind of things is to look at the Schnorr. Is it how you write Schnorr?
Correct, yeah.
Schnorr Identity Protocol. And Schnorr Identity Protocol is something pretty simple that is at the base of Schnorr signatures, and actually ECDSA signatures sort of follow the same, a similar pattern. And this is a zero-knowledge proof of a discrete logarithm.
Okay.
So here in this setting, the prover knows the discrete logarithm of a value y, so we'll call that x. And they want to prove to the verifier, so I'm the prover, you're the verifier, right? Cool. They want to prove that they know the x here, right? So the way it works, this is a 3-step protocol, a sigma protocol. The way it works is that you usually commit to a value. I'll call it
maybe?
R, yeah. Cool. You commit to a value that you generated, hopefully randomly. And then you receive a challenge from the verifier that hopefully is random, and we'll talk more about that.
Okay.
And then you send something which is, let's see if I can remember it, R plus c times x. So that's the value you can compute as the prover because you know x times the challenge plus that value you committed.
Okay.
And this protocol is like sound and complete, as we say in zero-knowledge proof, meaning that it works. If I know the value x, I can prove it to you, it's complete. And it's sound, I cannot lie to you if I don't know the value x.
Are we missing a verification step here?
Yeah, what does the verifier do at the end? Let's see also if I can remember that. So z obviously is something that you need to raise. So they will raise z, and they will check if it's equal to, there's many ways to do that check, but that's a way you can do it. Y times c. Because y times c
Plus r, no?
we can, times r, right? Let's open it. So y times c is g to the x c times g to the r. And so, which
Lovely.
is z. Is it? All right, we got it right.
Lovely.
On the first try. So, okay, so that scheme is, it's nice, it works, it's using Schnorr signatures. Let's see why it's zk, or let's see why it's not zk.
Sounds good.
So, okay, let's wipe that. So we're gonna take the idea of a simulator, and here what the simulator wants to do, or you as like you're the verifier, you're gonna call that simulator, and see if you can make it work. And basically, the way it works here is that you want to form a transcript that looks like message 1, message 2, message 3, which are that first point, that challenge, and that z. And you want it to verify
this equation?
Exactly. Even though the simulator who produces that doesn't know the x, right?
Okay.
So the way they do it is that basically they go out of order. They know that the verifier is gonna sample some random value, so they choose a random c in advance, and then they choose a random z actually.
Okay.
They don't care. They're so powerful, they don't care. And then they're gonna say, they're gonna know that they did things out of order. They're gonna say that M1 or whatever R is, okay, let's think about it. So you want that equation to work, right?
Yeah.
And
so we know this and we know this. So
right.
Can we set this?
Right. So you want R, sorry, it's big R, right?
Yeah.
You want big R to be equal to, we can look at that, that equation here, to be equal to GZ divided, right?
Yeah.
Divided by YC, or multiplied by Y minus C. And you know this, you know this value, you know everything here basically, and so you can compute that, and the equation will check.
That makes sense.
Does that make sense? Yeah. And so that's it. That's the transcript that the simulator can produce. And they didn't know the witness. They just formed this R, out of nowhere. You can verify these transcripts, and it doesn't really tell you anything about any witness. And
I see.
And basically that's the idea.
And so this is why the Schnorr Identity Protocol is zero knowledge, because we are able to produce this?
So it's not zero knowledge per se,
Okay.
because here we made an assumption. We actually made the assumption that the challenge here is sampled uniformly from a uniform distribution. And so that's not always true.
Right.
Like verifiers might get nasty and try to learn stuff from you, and might send you specific values to try and leak information from your data. And so we made an assumption in this case, which we called honest 1n.
Yeah.
Honest verifier zk.
Okay.
And so usually we write hvzk. And so it's important to know, because when you want to write proofs which are simulator based, you want to try and understand what can the simulator do.
Yeah.
If you always start with an honest verifier assumption, in which case the verifier can choose these challenges by themselves, Or just say that they received all the challenges in advance and they know exactly what the challenges look like. These are two similar models. But if usually we don't, there's two camps. Mm-hmm. One camp doesn't really like the HVZK, the honest verifier ZK, because maybe there's some attacks where they can leak things from your witness.
Right.
And maybe we can either both ways now. We can either talk about that, or we can talk about why actually honest verifier ZK is okay these days.
So I do have one question before we jump into those topics. It's what prevents a malicious prover from doing exactly this and proving something without knowledge of a witness?
So this doesn't break the soundness. Very good question, because here we went out of order.
Right.
Like we knew the challenge in advance, so we created that R after knowing the challenge. Mm-hmm. Whereas these schemes are really a commit and reveal. Well, there's no reveal actually, but they're commit and then receive a challenge. Mm-hmm. And in this case, it's important that you're following that order.
Okay.
Yeah. So, honest verifier, do we want that? Do we not want that? Mm-hmm. If we're doing an interactive protocol, it really matters. And so in that sense, we don't want the verifier to send us malicious challenges that can leak stuff. And so it turns out that for example, in this example, the Schnorr ID protocol, this is not dishonest verifier ZK because there's some issues here, and we don't actually know how to write a simulator that will show you something that you can verify and that works. And the reason is that if we assume that this might not be uniformly random, mm-hmm. then the simulator basically has to guess what the challenge will be. So they are this step, they have to produce some R while guessing the C. They come here and then they call the verifier. So we say that the simulator, here has Oracle access to the verifier. Mm-hmm. And so they will see that the challenge is not actually what they thought about, because probably the sample space is pretty large. And so they go back and they retry. And they can do that many times, but the idea is that they're bounded, the mm-hmm. runtime is bounded. And so they most likely will never find a challenge that never guessed the actual challenge.
I see.
If they could guess the actual challenge, then it probably would mean that the scheme is not secure.
That makes sense.
And so, well, actually, I'm going to backtrack on that, but you'll see why. So a way to make this actually dishonest verifier ZK, or just plain ZK, as we say, mm-hmm. is to have the challenge C sampled from a very small domain.
Okay.
So actually, if you, maybe I'll use different color. No, all right, let's keep on that. If you sample C from 0 or 1, like a bit, then we can prove that this is plain ZK, because now the simulator can with good estimates guess if it's going to be 0 or 1, if it's with expectation of 2 tries. Right. So maybe the first time they're not going to get it, but the second time they're expected to get it, and that's fine because the simulator can do that. They're a polynomial bounded mm-hmm. Algorithm.
Does this come at some kind of cost? Maybe a penalty on soundness?
Yeah, so it kind of sucks, right? Because the real prover in that case has basically 1 out of 2 chance to guess the challenge correctly as well.
Right. And
so it sucks because they might, half of the time, even if they don't know the witness, they'll correctly prove. So usually in these schemes, what you want to do is repeat it many, many, many times. Because here the soundness is like, well, I guess 1/2. But if you repeat it many, many times, you decrease the prover will have to guess the correct C 100 times in a row without mistakes, and that's harder. Or I don't know how many times.
So you said Schnorr signatures are based on this idea. I'm guessing we're not doing this with our Schnorr signatures.
Right. That's we're not repeating the protocol many times. Yeah, that would suck. So in Schnorr signatures, we have a non-interactive protocol, mm-hmm. Which I guess I'm going to sort of not mention too much, but it's basically I can create a proof. There is no interaction. You can just verify it. And to do that, we use a transformation called Fiat-Shamir because there were 2 guys. One was called Fiat, one was called Shamir, if I remember correctly, but I don't think I was born. And they invented this thing where basically, if you know these are public coin messages, which means that they're random and public.
From a big distribution,
So
right?
from a big distribution.
Cool.
But I would, yeah. If so we call them public coin messages, but it doesn't really matter. But it's just the term that we use. It's public randomness. Then you can replace these things by a hash function. Basically, that's the idea.
Yeah.
But of course, in theory, we call them random oracles.
Okay.
And this whiteboard is starting to get crowded, but it's fine. Yeah. And so when we start using hash functions, right now we're still in the ideal model, so we're still using ideal constructions. But when we're going to instantiate these, usually we use hash functions. And so once we switch to these things, we say that we're in the random oracle model, or RUM.
Okay.
Yeah, this is kind of the lingo. It doesn't matter too much, but it's good to know.
Yeah.
And so what we do here is that we replace any interaction from the verifier by hashes. In these Sigma protocols, it's pretty easy.
Yeah.
You just hash that first part. So a transcript would look like you would remove the challenge. And when you would verify these transcripts, you would basically use here instead of the C, you would use a hash of R, right?
And maybe Y, I'm guessing.
And maybe the statements. And so that's where it gets tricky. So people never know what are you supposed to include in the Fiat-Shamir transformation. And usually you want to include, the answer is you want to include as many things as possible. And I believe there were actually some problem when people instantiated signatures where they didn't include the public key, which is the Y here.
Yeah.
Famously, at DSA included the public key, so they were some contrived attacks were less annoying. But yeah. And so maybe it's worth mentioning, but in these days and age, we have more modern SNARKs.
Yeah.
And they're sort of like Sigma protocols, but they're much longer. They have more challenges.
Right.
And so here the Fiat-Shamir transformation is a bit trickier. You have to constantly hash, you have to continuously hash the transcript up to that point to create these challenges. And there's a lot of bugs in these kind of things.
So in this case, we've replaced our verifier by the random oracle or the hash function. Does that mean it now behaves honestly? And this is enough?
So yeah, so the idea here is that we're, in this model, you can either say the Fiat-Shamir stuff is a compiler, and if we're in the honest verifier model, then it's fine, we're now in ZK.
Right.
It's secure. Or you can say that you're in a, you can analyze this in a different way, where you can say that you're in the EP RUM.
Right.
Let's write it here. EP RUM.
What does E and P stand for?
So E is for explicit programmable, or explicitly programmable, or English. 2M, I believe.
Yeah.
Explicitly programmable, and that means that basically once you reach the challenge where you're supposed to do a hash of let's say R, let's not include the statements because YOLO,
Yeah.
And once you do that, once you have your call to that random oracle, you can basically the simulator will basically will program the random oracle and choose the answer.
Right.
And so they basically have a superpower, right? And without that superpower, they wouldn't be able to create a valid transcript.
Right. Right. Because we needed to know this value before knowing R.
Right.
Interesting.
So far I haven't really talked about the CRS stuff, and there's more superpowers. But maybe before we get there, maybe let's talk about the different flavor of zero knowledge.
Sounds good.
And then we can talk about our famous SNARKs and how simulators can do things in that world rather than Sigma protocols, which are fairly simple.
Sounds good.
So what are the three flavors of ZK? We talk about ZK as perfect ZK. That's the flavor most people like. This is chocolate. And the second flavor of ZK is statistical ZK. And a third flavor of ZK is computational ZK.
And in all these cases, we get honest verifier and malicious verifier variants.
So you can combine all of that. In every cases, there's so you can do all the combinations of ice cream.
Choose my toppings.
Yeah. And this is probably like vanilla or something. We don't like this one too much.
Right.
I mean, it depends on people, but that's fine. It doesn't mean it's bad.
So what's the differences between our three flavors?
So to understand the difference, we sort of have to look into probabilities.
Okay.
And so I've been talking about simulators and how a verifier can interact with the simulator and how the simulator can have oracle access to the verifier and stuff like that. Maybe it's a bit confusing, so let's put it in writing.
Yeah.
As usual in cryptography, we play games and then we check the probabilities of these games. So I can never remember this one, so let's see if I get it on the first try. But here we're playing a game where the verifier is sort of the adversary. Like they want to check if they really can talk to the simulator and talk to the prover and see if there's a difference. So we get an instance and a witness, or vice versa, sorry, a witness and an instance. We get them from the adversary. Mm-hmm. And then we're gonna get a random bit at random.
Okay.
And then we're gonna say this proof is created by a prover on the witness and statements if b equals 0, or by the simulator if b equals 1. So basically we're playing this game, but we don't know if we're talking to the prover or we're talking to the simulator.
Right.
And then the adversary, and I'm kind of simplifying here. The adversary usually take more inputs, and
sure.
But who cares? YOLO. And now the adversary takes the proof and the statements and respond with let's say b prime.
Okay.
And basically the adversary is trying to guess, right? If they're talking to the prover or the simulator, they're trying to distinguish actually. So you might see a D here in some definition.
Right.
And here we want to check the probability that they actually made a good guess.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? This I might be forgetting some details, but that's the idea. So let's look at it again. Yeah. Adversary chooses the instance and witness. And either the prover or the simulator creates a proof, and then they have to try and figure out who
which
did
one.
Right?
Okay. So this probability should be, I guess.
What's the best case?
The best case for us, well, 1/2, right? We're trying to guess a bit.
Right.
So it's a 50-50 chance.
Exactly. So if this probability is 1/2,
we are very happy.
Is exactly 1/2 actually, we're in the perfect world.
Right.
All right. This is we're happy. If it's around 1/2 up to some negligible value, I'll just write it like that, I guess. But usually there's better ways to write it, but it doesn't really matter. If it's almost close to 1/2, we say that it's statistical.
Okay.
And now if it's almost close to 1/2, but the adversary is bounded, because so far we basically assume that the adversary was unbounded. And
unlimited power.
Unlimited power.
Okay.
So that's also interesting, right? But if now we're limiting the power of the adversary, which is actually, not too bad of an assumption in the real world, because computers are bounded and so on, then we say that we're in the computational ZK.
Okay. I mean, things like discrete log are computational, right? So
yeah,
we might as well keep going.
Yeah, exactly. So if you look at how different proofs are created or different attacks, you can see that sometimes the adversary will be able to compute this, and so these proofs are usually in these models.
Wow. Okay. So, David, I wanted to ask, how does this now apply to, I guess, protocols that we're more familiar with in this series, something like Plonk, let's say?
So I guess let me make some room on
this side,
the whiteboard. we don't care about Schnorr because that's a sigma.
Yeah.
And we're talking about Plonk or modern SNARKs.
Yeah.
So there's a few different ways to do ZK or to try to create these, same proofs with simulators. But of course, things are more complex. We have a lot of interaction. We have a lot of messages, like in the transcripts at the end. It's kind of hard to explain everything here on the whiteboard session, but the thing we can do is simplify what Plonk looks like or like what these protocols looks like. And if you look essentially at a proof in Plonk, what it looks like is an array of commitments, like, I don't know, C1, C2, C3, etc., and an array of evaluations, E1, E2, E3, etc. Is there more to these schemes? I don't think so, but I believe it's commitments, polynomial commitments, and evaluation at some points.
That makes sense.
And so when we look at that, the idea is that it's, or maybe an insight is that it's easier to make this ZK if these things look random.
Yeah.
The more random these things look like, the more ZK it is, right? If you imagine that all of these things are purely uniformly random, then it's purely ZK.
Yeah. Well, the simulator can just put out random stuff. Right?
Exactly. As the simulator, you just pick random stuff and
Cool.
Exactly. But if you do that, then the scheme is not very sound because then if everything's random, like how do you even?
Because we still need to pass the verification step, right?
Right.
Okay.
But if you pass the verification step just by choosing random values, then the prover can do the same, and then what's the point?
Fair.
Okay, so let's look at the commitments first, and then we'll look at the evaluations. So you have different types of commitments. We have KZG, Pedersen commitments. You can use hashes and so on. And so here, to make commitments look random, we want to look at the hiding property of commitments.
Okay.
So maybe let me write that. Hiding commitments. And what does it mean that a commitment is hiding? By the way, commitments have to be binding or they have different properties, but I'm not going to say anything about that. Okay. I'm only going to talk about hiding. Hiding basically means that it looks more random and it hides what's committed. Remember earlier we were talking about commitments with the Schnorr protocol by just hiding stuff in the exponents. But here we're going to talk about maybe simpler commitments to start with. We can talk about hashes.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah, let's do that.
So imagine I want to create a commitment from hashing a value. This is not super secure as is.
Okay.
Actually, let me ask you why. Do you see why this is not the best commitment?
In terms of hiding?
In terms of hiding, yeah.
Well, I guess every time I commit to V, I'll always have the same commitment.
True.
And it's somewhat deterministic, right?
Yeah, it's deterministic. You can, if you have two commitments and you already know the commitment of value, you can distinguish them.
Yes.
Any other reason you can think of?
I guess
that's a good one.
If I know candidate values, maybe V1, V2, I can hash V1 and V2 to see which one you used.
Right. So you can try values by yourself. And if this is part of the values you can try, you can also see that it's not you can discover the value behind it. So basically you're right. This is you can with these examples we can clearly see that it's not hiding.
Okay.
And you can think of other things like if V is pretty small, you can try all the values from 0 to 1 and stuff like that. So how do we fix that? Basically what we can do is that we can append some randomness. And
are the same as that are? I'm guessing no, right?
Let's
let's remove this.
Let's remove that.
Cool.
So by appending some randomness to the hash, then you make it impossible to guess to compute the hash and see if it checks, because you don't know what that randomness is. And if that randomness is large enough, then
I can't brute force it, right?
You cannot brute force it. Exactly.
If I commit to V multiple times, I'll have different randomness. And the commitment will be different every time, right?
Exactly also, cool. Right. So every time you commit, you sample R randomly, and so you get random different commitments.
Cool.
And so here, if you imagine that you were using a hash function, then this is one way of really hiding it.
That makes sense.
And this will, we can also talk about the distribution, but since R is like randomly distributed, then the commitment is also uniformly distributed across the space.
And now a simulator is going to be happy.
Exactly. Very easy to simulate. You just pick random values and that's fine.
So you showed us also this commitment from the Schnorr protocol with G to some power.
Right.
How would we randomize it in that case?
G to the power x. Actually, maybe it's something that I didn't mention previously, but in our simulator, we really want things to look like the same distribution as a real prover. Mm-hmm. So here, if the real prover is doing things that are really uniformly distributed on the domain, then it's easier to create a simulator because you can just pick things that are on this uniformly distributed on the same domain. Yeah. And so it's, people won't be able to distinguish them.
Right.
But if, if this is distributed over like some values and the simulator can pick different values, mm-hmm. different sets, then these sets are different and then it's easier for the distinguisher to differentiate them. So that's something that's, when you create a simulator, that's something you have to keep in mind all the time. Mm-hmm. You have to do something that's, exactly the same set as a real prover in perfect ZK, or almost the same set in statistical ZK or computational ZK. Yeah. And so the insight here is that it's easier to do that if it's purely random, if it looks purely random.
That makes sense.
Which it is in our case with the hash, but not here, right?
Yes.
So Pedersen commitments already here. I never know how to write it, but I think this is how you write it. Yeah. Pedersen commitments are basically very simple. You just multiply this with another base, which you don't know the discrete log of, raised to the power R. This is your randomness.
Again, okay.
And so here, basically, this will give you like any points in your group, mm-hmm. and so we're back to like very good hiding.
Something that looks random. Okay.
In the case of KZG, you have something very similar to that, mm-hmm. Except that people don't really use it because of the costs, and so we don't have this perfect hiding, and so we have to do some other sort of some other randomization. So
we'll get probably something computationally hiding?
No.
No, okay.
Because we'll actually randomize things in a good way. So,
okay, that's great.
So we're still in the perfect hiding.
Okay, so we now have a method to hide our Plonk commitments. How do we deal with the evaluations?
Okay, so these commitments are not commitments of values, where we're talking about polynomials. And so you have to think of polynomials are like, a polynomial f of a degree d, right? This is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so if I start giving you evaluations of that polynomial of degree d, I'm starting to leak information about that polynomial. Right? Actually, let me ask you a question. How many evaluations do you need to recover my polynomial f?
That'll be d plus 1.
D plus 1, right? By definition, if you have d plus 1 evaluations, you know exactly the description of the polynomial.
Yeah.
That's good enough. So obviously, we don't want to have d plus 1 evaluation for the same polynomial. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, we're screwed. But even one evaluation is bad enough, because this evaluation is, really tied to the polynomial and mm-hmm. to the witness, and so this might give some advantage to our adversary.
Right.
They might be able to distinguish.
Well, now they only need to find d values because they already got 1. If they're trying to collect d plus 1,
well,
I'm guessing we've given 1 to them.
Yeah, but they won't be able to get d plus 1, but maybe 1 is enough to distinguish.
I see.
Because they just have to distinguish, right? They don't have to recover f.
This game.
They just have to play that game, right? So the way we do things is that we randomize these polynomials.
What does that mean?
So what does that mean? We basically want, because if we randomize a polynomial, then we don't have the same polynomial, right?
Yes.
And if we add randomness in the polynomial, and so it kind of messes the protocol, and then the verifier doesn't have something they can actually check.
Yeah.
So this randomization has to be controlled. It has to preserve the rules of the games and the identities that we want to do in Plonk. And so it's a controlled randomization.
Okay.
I don't know how much I need to recap here, but in Plonk you have these vanishing polynomials.
Okay.
And we do stuff on a domain, the circuit domain, where we chose a bunch of points.
So actually, maybe we can write this down. We have our roots of unity. I think those were covered in previous sessions.
Okay. So let's say we have a domain H, which is the domain generated by, let's say, G, our generator, or all the...
I think they've been using omega in the previous
Omega?
sessions.
All right, let's use that.
That'll be helpful.
And we also, so you must have seen a vanishing polynomial, which you can write in a succinct way. Maybe I'll write the size of H here, -1.
Yeah.
And all the roots of unity, all the omega roots of unity will basically cancel when raised to the power the size of their domain, the order of their group. And so we have a nice, succinct description of our polynomial, our vanishing polynomial.
Okay.
If that doesn't make sense, I guess people can just go back to previous videos.
Cool.
So the way our f works, so imagine that there is some polynomial in our Plonk or SNARK or whatever, which is f, and we want to create some f prime, which is randomized. What we're gonna do is that f prime is gonna be equal to f
as before,
plus our vanishing polynomial times let's call it g times g of x.
Do you want maybe a different letter to avoid conflict here?
Damn it.
M?
M?
Yeah, M.
All right, let's do m of x. All right. So when we're looking at that, we still have that f prime of x is equal to f of x when we're in our domain.
So when we're evaluating these omegas?
These omega or powers of omegas.
I see.
Right?
Because
this thing here will be 0.
Right.
Whenever we have x is equal to a power of omega, that right side disappears.
Cool.
But when we're not, and usually when we have evaluations here, we evaluate these polynomials at points that are outside of our domain.
Right.
Not necessarily, but with high probability enough, because our domain is pretty small. Then this thing will activate and will randomize our evaluations.
So what is m in this case?
So m in this case is a random polynomial. M of x equals, let's say, r0 plus r1x plus r2x squared, and so on.
Okay.
And the number of random values here, or the degree of that polynomial, that random polynomial m, is dictated by the number of evaluations. So the more evaluations, the more randomness you want to have.
I see.
And there's I guess there's different ways to prove that this works. Maybe a way to prove that this works is that if you evaluate this in let's say, if you evaluate f prime in 2 points, you can see that you can, so we have f prime of, alpha 1 and f prime of alpha 2. If you evaluate that at 2 points, then you can see that if you evaluate that at 2 points, you can see that you can basically, and you give them like whatever value you want, you can see that you can recover, you have a system of equation basically with, if you have enough random values, so let's say 2, you have 2 unknowns in a system of equations of linearly independent equations, of 2 linearly independent equations, and so you can solve it.
Right.
I don't know if that made sense, but that's one way you can try to think about it. Basically, I'll rephrase that in a different way, but you can obtain any evaluations you want for 2 points if you have if you have a degree 1 polynomial, if you have two randomness coefficients. And so if you have more evaluations, you want more randomness coefficients.
Makes sense. So I guess the last question I had is, what is the total degree of this f prime polynomial?
Oh yeah, so because we're adding stuff here,
Right.
unfortunately, we're raising the degree of this thing. Yeah, so it's gonna be basically f most likely is already the degree of the vanishing polynomial.
Right.
Because of Plonk or whatever we're doing for reasons.
Sure.
But m here is the number of evaluation minus 1.
Minus 1.
Right. Because for if you do 2 evaluations, you have a degree 1 polynomial.
Okay.
And so you're gonna it's basically you're multiplying that, right? And so if this is degree n, then you get n plus let's say 2 if you have 2 evaluations. And so you're increasing you have an n d plus 2 maybe.
Right.
Or d plus 3 or something like that. So you're adding some degrees, which can be annoying.
Right, because it's a cost to the prover, the verifier?
Yeah, okay. Basically.
Cool. Shall we look at KZG?
Oh yeah, so we talk about hash, I guess.
Yeah.
And Pedersen. Let's briefly mention KZG. So KZG has a different way to do commitments. I guess you've talked about that in previous sessions.
Yeah, session 1, absolutely.
So commitments of a function is basically the commitment of that function at some secret points. Should I maybe a toe?
Yeah,
I guess. And so you're not really you're revealing something, especially against an adversary that's unbounded.
Right.
When you're trying to do these proofs, you're revealing the discrete log, so the adversary can just see that if they're unbounded.
So we revealed one of the evaluations of f.
So what's the natural way of hiding that?
Like we just did earlier?
Exactly. Okay, you just add more randomness in this masking polynomial.
Cool.
So nothing magical. You see that as an evaluation.
Cool.
So yeah, maybe it's worth mentioning, but Plonk is instantiated with KZG or different commitments. Mina uses Pedersen commitments. And so depending on the commitment you're using, you have different hiding polynomials.
Right.
Like you have different degrees.
That makes sense. I had another question, which is when we're working with KZG, we have this trusted setup, right? Where does the trusted setup happen in this game? And does it matter?
Right, because we're still, as I said, we still want to create these proofs with the simulator to prove ZK. We still care about perfect or statistical or computational ZK and all these things. So this is basically the same, like we're still in that model, except that we have one more step where we have to create the trusted setup, right? That toe here for KZG. And so where does it go? Basically the simulator here will create the CRS or SRS, let's call it SRS, structured.
Yeah.
And we'll output that trapdoor.
Right.
I'm gonna kind of abuse notation. Usually you want to do something like you want to choose that B first, and if you're in the prover, you have a normal SRS. If you're in the simulator setting, then the simulator can create the SRS, which might be different.
Right.
So the distinguisher here might be able to tell that the SRS looks different also. So that's something that's possible. So I'm abusing things, but just keep in mind that the SRS might be different here. And
quick question, what is this? Is this our toxic waste?
Oh yeah, that's the toxic waste, that's the trapdoor, that's the secret point. You know.
Okay, cool.
So now the simulator has some extra power. They can use the knowledge of the tool, right?
Interesting. So it would come in here as well?
Exactly.
Cool.
So we would add toe here. And actually, if you look at the ZK proof for Plonk and stuff like that, they don't really care about choosing the challenges.
Right.
Because they have so much power already that they can just use the trapdoor.
That makes sense. Okay. And so here, the order of things, is it always the case that the adversary chooses the instance witness after the SRS exists?
Right. Okay. So maybe we can mention that, but there is an adaptive and non-adaptive version. We have so many flavors of ZK now.
Of course.
But here, the simulator has a chance to choose the SRS before, or has a chance, doesn't have a chance, let's say, before seeing the witness and the instance. So this is called the adaptive model, because the adversary can see the SRS
and can adapt to that
SRS.
Right?
Okay,
that makes sense.
But if this came before, then we would say it's the non-adaptive model, because the adversary is stuck with a witness and an instance, and then the simulator can see that, and so that the simulator would see. Sorry, not the witness.
Right.
The simulator would see the instance in that non-adaptive model.
Correct. Yeah. Cool.
But it doesn't matter too much. What we want to keep in mind is that we want to give the least amount or the more power the distinguisher has, or the better.
Okay.
Generally.
So as a sort of recap of the properties, we said it's okay to have computational zero knowledge because our adversaries are going to be bounded. Adaptive we want for sure because our trusted setup already exists.
Right. Or it's more like you want to give that kind of power to your it's a better proof if the adversary has more power.
That makes sense.
But I'm not saying, and also for computational, it's okay, but usually perfect is better.
Right. Of course.
Or statistical is better. Like these two are.
What I was trying to get to is what do our protocols have in practice? So if I do hide my Plonk commitments and I do have these maskings for my evaluations, what flavor of zero knowledge do we get?
So usually what you get is statistical ZK.
Cool.
And to my understanding, it's mostly about. It's not perfect because you have some points that won't work in a transcript. Like for example, if the evaluation points are in your domain, the domain of the thing, things don't really work. Like there's some edge cases where things don't work, but it's negligible. And that's why we're in statistical.
That makes sense.
But it turns out that there was a recent result on Plonk and the ZK zero knowledge-ness of Plonk, and that it was actually not statistical ZK. Maybe it was computational ZK, we don't know. Okay. But it was proven not to be statistical ZK. It was a small fix. It was, I think it was found maybe years ago, but it was only published recently, and it was fixed in the original paper.
So it is fixed. So the original paper, the fixed version of the paper is now back to being statistical zero knowledge? Yeah,
so now we have statistical ZK Plonk. Maybe worth mentioning also, but Plonk, like basically all the papers come out. Actually, Plonk was doing better because they explain how to do ZK. A lot of papers don't even explain to you how to do ZK. They just, exercise left for the reader.
Okay.
Write
your simulator yourself.
Yeah, do that proof yourself. But not even simulator, right? It's like, how do I even add ZK in my scheme, right? At least Plonk told you how to add ZK. They just didn't have a proof.
Right.
And so that was the problem. There was no proof, or at least it was not statistical ZK.
That makes sense.
I can talk a bit about that.
Sure.
It's kind of hard to. Okay, let me make some space. It's kind of hard to explain on a whiteboard here, especially as Plonk is complicated.
Right.
But maybe I can talk about some of the intuition behind the attack.
That sounds perfect.
The intuition is, of course, that. So we don't want to write a simulator. If we could write a simulator, then we would have a proof that it's ZK.
Yeah.
So what we want is to write an adversary, but I'm gonna write a different kind of adversary because. So what they did was not to prove that it was not ZK. What they did was to prove that it was not witness indistinguishable, and that's a different property.
Okay.
A weaker property. And so if you don't have that, you don't have ZK.
Okay.
If you have ZK, you have that. If you don't have that, you don't have ZK.
Makes sense.
Informally, witness indistinguishability is you have two witnesses. So the adversary or the verifier creates two witnesses.
Right.
And then they give that to the prover. So you're the prover.
Sure.
And then you choose at random or like however you want, at random, most likely, which witness you want to prove. You give it back to me. If I can guess which witness of the two witnesses I gave you, you proved,
Right.
then we
You
don't have this.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
So they demonstrated an attack for a very simple circuit for that. And basically, the problem in Plonk is that you have this quotient polynomial T,
Right.
which was masked. Actually, was fine. But they actually chunked it in T1.
Yes, T low, T mid,
yeah.
and T high, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'll write it like that. So T of X was actually chunked because it was too big, right? So you had T low plus X, Xn times T mid plus X2n
Right. Yes.
times T high, was it?
Yeah, I think so.
And because they split it like this, and they forgot to mask these polynomials, these three polynomials, then you had some leakage.
Right, because these get committed individually, right?
Exactly.
And then we're back to this problem here of there.
And then we're back to this problem. And so if I remember correctly, if you write the equations with their example of there's like one gates and identical permutation. So it was a very simple example, but they say it generalizes. And basically you could see a relation between T low and T mid. There was like some sort of relation when you would analyze the transcripts. If you could see that relation based on the first witness or the second witness, you could distinguish them. And so the easy fix was just to mask them as we saw
right down there
previously.
Cool.
Yeah.
Very
cool. Yeah.
Does that wrap it up?
Yeah. I think if you have any other questions, I'm happy to answer.
Maybe a quick summary of everything we saw.
Yeah. So ZK is important or not, depending on the scheme. Sometimes you only care about succinctness. There's different flavors of ZK. We like the perfect flavor, but you have perfect, statistical, and computational, and these are fine depending on context. And as we saw, statistical is usually where we get with Plonk and other schemes. We talked about dishonest verifier, honest verifier, and that dishonest verifier, it's fine if we don't get it because usually we are in the non-interactive setting with the Fiat-Shamir transformation. And we also talked about adaptive and non-adaptive models, and we prefer if we're in the adaptive model and these kind of things. And I guess we talked about these two things here, the simulator and how to hide things.
Yeah.
So simulator is the way we create proofs, and the simulator has different powers depending on all these models. Maybe they can query the verifier, and they don't really need to because they know what the verifier is going to do, or they need to and they need to guess in the honest or dishonest verifier settings. And we also saw hiding commitment. So in KZG or Pedersen or hashes, how can we really make it look random or distributed randomly, even in spite of evaluations as well. So how do we make it so that these evaluations look random and don't leak anything? And I guess finally we saw how Plonk was not statistically zero knowledge.
And then was fixed.
Yeah, because they forgot to mask these polynomials.
One thing I really want to add is this point to me is very important. And I've seen this mistake made many times where people think hashing something makes it private. And that's not true, right? Because that is now a deterministic commitment.
Right.
And so you get this sort of fingerprint of the data. So yeah, I wish people pay attention to this and remember that. Great. I think now people can say they are experts in zero knowledge rather than just ZK, the acronym. Thanks for clearing that up.
Cool. Thanks for having me.